Hello there, welcome into Sports Map. I'm AJ Hoffman. That is Joel Blank, and we're going to talk some Houston Rockets basketball. Joel, I'll just make it a simple question. Who do you think wins in the Westbrook for Wall trade?
I think, honestly, it's the Washington Wizards. Everybody you talk to in the D.C. area thought that the John Wall contract and his health situation was handcuffing the franchise and they were going to be stuck and screwed for the next 3 years. Getting out from under that contract to get a viable starting point guard that used to be an all-star in Russell Westbrook and still basically is a win for a team that actually has a system that Russ can fit into. He comes in and he instantaneously becomes the point guard that John Wall hasn't been because he hasn't played since 2018, and he has a complimentary guy in Bradley Beal to get the ball to that's going to knock down threes and be a consistent shooter. They've made some nice subtle additions in terms of some young shooters. They've got a roster that could possibly fight for a very low seed in the playoffs, which I don't think any Washington fan thought they could. From a Rockets perspective, we don't know what kind of John Wall we're going to get in terms of his health, what he's going to bring to the table. And if James Harden won, who, if you believe Woj, he wanted to play with John Wall instead of Westbrook, but he doesn't really want to play in Houston. So does this change his mind? Does this make the team better? And then when you look at all the complementary pieces that the Rockets have either moved in or moved out over the course of the offseason, I don't think their roster and their rotation is better than it was a year ago. So I think Washington wins the trade.
The upside of John Wall is intriguing to me. There is the possibility that after these injuries, these are, considered catastrophic injuries, that he's never the same guy. If he is the guy that he was 3 years ago, he's 30 years old. You may have won this trade. Now, that's a long shot. It's a long shot that he did. Because here's what I know. I know that James Harden and Russell Westbrook weren't winning a championship together. That wasn't going to work. At least with John Wall, there's like a roll of the dice aspect to it where, hey, throw something against the wall, let's see what sticks. It at least gives you some sort of new hope. Now, if it doesn't work, if John Wall's never the same guy, then you're not winning anyway. And then, of course, you're going to have to start thinking about getting rid of James Harden at that point. If you were going to trade Russ, I thought you would trade him away for expiring contracts. And I figured you would take some bad contracts. I figured you would take a Tobias Harris or something like that. But I thought that those contracts wouldn't be, the same length that Russell's contract is, because it really feels like you didn't negotiate yourself anything for your future, which is what I would have hoped to do with that Russell Westbrook contract.
I was going to say, AJ, the other thing in doing that, if you make the concession to take on some bad contracts that are expiring, you also get draft picks in return. Yeah. So therefore, you kind of fill the cupboards that have been bare based on Daryl Morey's trades of the past. The other thing I'll throw back at you with the Wall situation is John Wall has always been a guy that's had the ball in his hands. That's why he's flourished as a very quick, very skilled point guard in this league. How is John Wall going to have the ball in his hands when James Harden has the ball so much?
It's a good question. We'll get back to this topic. First, tell me about Fitz Roofing.
I love the people at Fitz Roofing. They're loyal to us, but they're also loyal to the people of Houston, Texas, which is most important. You need anything done with your roof, there's only one place to call. It's Fitz Roofing. They have the best ratings in the business, the best warranties, and the best product, and they do the best job from start to finish every single time. Call them today, 832-521-3001. Get that free no-obligation inspection, and you'll be on your way to making sure you have the best roof in the neighborhood. Check them out, Fitz Roofing, making a difference one home at a time.
What if the Rockets had decided to trade away James Harden instead? Given what we know, what they got out of the Westbrook deal, do you feel they would have been better off following through on James Harden's wishes and moving him and then putting those pieces with Westbrook, or do you think this was the ideal situation?
I think that either way, I think their best scenario was with a first-time general manager and a first-time head coach, you didn't need to make a knee-jerk reaction, and you needed to see that you got, as we were talking about earlier, the best deal possible with the returns you got instead of reacting quickly. If James was to go, there's a good chance that I would have kept Russell Westbrook, because all he wanted was a chance to prove he hasn't lost a step. He still can play at a high level, and if he has the ball in his hands, he can make a team go. And I think that if James went, he could have that opportunity without having to leave, and he was a good soldier all of last year while James did whatever he wanted to do. So I think that you still could have been okay if James left by keeping Russ and building around him, but that didn't happen. Now the case is sitting there, the scenario is painted for you that is James going to be happy with the moves made? Is he going to be okay? Or has he not changed his stance at all? No matter who you bring in and what you do, he still wants to bail on Houston and get out as fast as he possibly can.
I think there's not really much of a doubt of who the alpha is here in Houston. John Wall. I think John Wall would even admit, hey, I'm coming off a major injury. I'm going to work my way slowly into this. On Washington's side of things, do you think Russ is going in expecting to be the number one guy there? Or has a torch been passed? Because I know Bradley Beal, part of the reason he wasn't really thrilled about John Wall coming back is he didn't want to lose the touches that he's got, because Bradley Beal has really, his game over those 2 years that John Wall has been out has taken him to another level. Do you think that Russ coming in kind of downgrades what Beal's been able to do?
I really don't, because I think the X factor is Scotty Brooks. Scotty Brooks was Russ's coach at OKC. They've got an unbelievable relationship, and Russ gets the keys to the car again. So as long as he's driving and he's got the ball in his hands and he's deciding when they get out on the break and where he can be effective and when they can get into more of a half-court game where he can distribute the basketball, Bradley Beal's still going to get his touches. Paul George had his best career year when playing alongside Russell Westbrook. I think Russ can run the system and Beal can still get the same amount of good looks, and they can be a more successful team because of it and all the things that Russ brings to the table. So that's why I think Russ and Washington win this deal, simply because of the fact they're way better off than they are having to try and dig out of another year with Beal trying to do everything all by himself. He now has some help, and it's a guy that can actually help him be better and get that next contract that he's going to be looking for in another year or so.
Well, let's wrap it up with this. Who would you rather have to build around? Which duo would you rather build around, Beal and Westbrook or Harden and Wall? Let's assume John Wall's 80% of what he was 3 years ago.
What is the criteria? Is it regular season success, or is it chasing and winning a championship? In Washington's case, they're just happy making the playoffs, and they're probably going to have a better regular season than they would have had otherwise. Houston has such high expectations every year, whether they be realistic or not, that anything short of a championship is going to be graded as a failure by the fan base and the people that are rooting for the Rockets. The fact of the matter is the Rockets with Westbrook and Harden weren't going to win anything. And at a certain point, you can blame Dwight Howard and Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook, and maybe you blame John Wall. But the one consistent and constant through all of those different teams for the Rockets has been James Harden, and it hasn't worked. And I have no reason to believe that now it's going to be any different.
I don't disagree with you, and I don't think that James Harden and John Wall are suddenly the key components of an NBA championship team. But I do think if we're just taking those two guys, those sets of two, I'd take the Harden and Wall side, just because I know what I've got in James Harden. I've got an MVP candidate every single season, no matter what's around him. And if John Wall is 80% of what he was, that's a bonus. While I don't hate the Beal and Westbrook duo, I actually like Bradley Beal a lot. I like that Wizards team, but I don't think that Wizards team with those two guys is any closer to a championship. You said earlier, they might make the playoffs now, which would be an upgrade. But I think if in the grand scheme, who would I feel better about having? I think it's James Harden and John Wall for me.